Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started with our afternoon session. Welcome back to everyone. Nice to see you guys. Hopefully you're nice and refreshed with some good nutritious food, and welcome to the new folks who came in. Welcome to you guys. We're going to start with meditation, and then I will move into this topic of sharing the path to enlightenment, how to guide children along the path. So we're going to start with breathing mindfulness meditation, going in with chanting, then I'll give you some guidance, then I'll just be quiet for a period of time. We'll be meditating, and then we'll come out with the chanting as well. If you guys would like to see the chants that I do, they're on the table over there. There's a sheet where I chant, and there's nothing mystical or magical about these chants. It's not prayer or anything like that. It just helps you get more benefit out of the meditation itself. So if you'd like to join along, you're more than welcome, and welcome to everyone online as well. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Bhutang Bhagavanthang Abhivateyami Savakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipano Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Sanghang Namami Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Iti piso Bhagava Arahang Samma Sambuddho Vicacaranang Sammuno Sakato Rokavito Anutero Purisa Dhamma Sati Satatava Manusanang Bhutto Bhagavati. Okay, with the lower body and hands and arms comfortable, and the upper body erect, just close the eyes and start breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. Here you're just looking to establish the breath, a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. Not forced or controlled, just a gradual inhale through the nose, developing a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. And then when you're ready, exhale out through the nose, experiencing the full breath. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. Your breath may not match up with the guidance that I'm providing, and that's okay. This is your practice. I'm just here for guidance. You can use this voice as a reminder that whenever you get to the next inhale, breathing gradually through the nose, developing a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. And then when you're ready, exhale out through the nose, experiencing the full breath. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the breath well established, start fixating the mind on the breath, either the sound of the breath coming into the nose or the sensation of air moving over the skin into the nose. The breath is the present moment. Fixate the mind on the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the mind fixated on the breath, whenever you notice that it moves off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. No need to observe the thought, label it, judge it, analyze it, or even try to figure out where it's coming from. Whenever you notice that the mind moves off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. I'm going to be quiet now and let you do this work of focusing on the breath, cutting off and letting go anytime the mind moves off the breath. You have nowhere to go. There's nothing to do. No one needs you right now. This is your time to focus on the breath. Breathing in and out. อะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธมะคะวะพุทธังมะคะวันหังอภิวาเทมิสวากขาโตมะคะวะตาธัมโมธัมมังนามัสสามิสุปฏิปันโนภะคะวะโตสาวกสังโฆสังฆังนามามินะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะอิติปิโสภะคะวะอะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธวิจาจารณังสัมโมโนสัคขะโตโรกาวิโตอนุเตโรปุริสาธัมมาสติสัตตาตาวามนุสนังพุทโธภควติ Okay, if you guys would like to slowly make your way out of meditation, I'm going to transition over to talking about sharing the path to enlightenment with children, how to guide children on the path. And this doesn't just encompass children, but really anybody. If you're interested in sharing this even with your parents or your siblings or other people, this talk that I'll share with you will help you to be able to do that. You know, one of the rewarding things about getting to enlightenment and training your mind and getting on the path to enlightenment is not only are you learning things that's really helping you and benefiting your life, and you can see through the teachings of the Buddha that they're absolutely helping you, but one of the really rewarding things about this path is being able to share it with someone else. This is really, really rewarding. But sometimes there can be a craving in the mind to share teachings with other people. And you're going to need to be able to restrain your mind and eliminate any craving. Because if you're craving to share teachings with others, you'll tend to push them on people. You'll tend to force them on people. You'll tend to teach people in an unsolicited way. And this will just turn people away from you. And you'll actually be very ineffective at sharing these teachings with others, as long as you have craving. Even the Buddha shares this. He talks about how difficult it would be to share these teachings if you had craving, anger, or ignorance in your mind. So you're going to need to get to a point where you've gained enough wisdom on this path that your mind is experiencing improvements, but then there might become a point where you would like to share these teachings with others. And children are a prime person who would potentially be able to learn these teachings. Because if any of us would have learned these teachings when we were young, it would have saved us from a whole lot of heartache, a whole lot of misery, a whole lot of pain in our life. Because if you can get to enlightenment at the age of 7, 8, 10, 12, during the lifetime of the Buddha, children would get to enlightenment as early as age 7. So you can actually learn these teachings very early. The way that I think about it is my son was actually learning when he was inside the womb. When he was in his mom's womb, she was meditating, and this was really beneficial. Me and my wife, we weren't arguing, we weren't bitter and hostile with each other. So he never experienced any of that, even when he was inside the womb. Because sometimes we think that a baby inside the womb, that they're blocked off from the world, but they can actually hear things that are going on. My son, when he came out from his mom's stomach, he recognized my voice immediately. And I used to play the mandolin while he was inside his mom's stomach, and it would help him sleep. And when he came out of her womb, I would play the mandolin and he would recognize it. So inside the womb, the child can still hear that skin of the woman and her body, there's vibrations that can go into the body and the child can hear. So even when he was inside the womb, he was actually learning in terms of he was around a calm environment. His mom and dad weren't yelling and arguing and hostile and bitter with each other. His mom was meditating. And then when he came out, there were things that we did even when he was an infant, when he couldn't even speak, when he was 6 months old, when he was 1 year old, 2 years old. We were actually doing certain things to help him with his mind. And then I formally started teaching when he was 6 years old. And now he's at the point where he doesn't really experience much discontentedness, just some irritability here and there, just little tiny incidences here and there, because he's trained his mind so well from learning the teachings from his mom, his dad, from Thai people growing up in Thailand. If any of us would have had that opportunity, we would have a very different life. So as you learn these teachings and you gain more wisdom and you see the impact that it has for your mind and your life, one of the natural things is you might be interested to share it with other people. And that's what I'm going to share with you. So as we go, you're welcome to ask any and all questions, just like normal. If you'd like to ask questions here at the temple, if you could use the microphones there. And if you're online and you would like to ask questions, just put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or in Zoom, raise your hand electronically. So if you're going to share these teachings with a child, it's important to understand that children are like a growing plant. They are the plant that's growing. You're like the plant enthusiast. You're interested in growing this plant. In this stake or this stick, this is the guide that's going to help the plant grow, right? This guide is the teachings of the Buddha. So the child is the plant, the parents or the aunts, the uncles, the grandparents, you're the plant enthusiast. You're interested in growing this plant. And the stake or the guide is the teachings of the Buddha. That's what's going to guide you and helping you to guide children or guide anybody. It's going to give you like a barometer. It's going to give you a navigation. It's going to give you a compass to be able to guide this child or anybody that you might decide to share these teachings with. So you can keep this in mind as you're choosing to share the teachings potentially. The number one thing that you need to do in order to be able to share these teachings with anybody, not just a child, but anybody, is you need to first acquire wisdom yourself. That if you don't have the wisdom of these teachings, you wouldn't be able to share with anyone else. There's some places that might teach you that your goal in life is to not get to enlightenment and then to share with others how to actually get to enlightenment. But this isn't actually possible. In order for you to be able to help others get to enlightenment, you're going to need to cultivate wisdom yourself to be able to get to enlightenment. So that's always should be the number one priority, is developing your own mind, cultivating your own wisdom. As you cultivate that wisdom, then you have something to actually share with somebody. If you were going to teach somebody how to drive a car, you would need to first learn how to drive a car yourself. And you would need to probably drive that car for 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years before you could ever teach someone to drive a car. And then once you've learned how to drive it and you drive it really well, you could then teach others how to drive a car. But if you've never learned how to drive a car before, you would be useless to teach someone how to drive a car. So it's the same thing, is that if you're going to help somebody in life, if you're going to help them on this path to enlightenment, you need to first cultivate the wisdom of how to do that. So that's the number one priority. Remember that a child is their own being. While you might think of them as this is my daughter or this is my son, in reality, they're not yours. They don't belong to you. They are their own being. But oftentimes as parents or grandparents or aunts or uncles, we assume this possession that they're my child. They're my son, my daughter. And now we feel like everything that we want for them they should do those things. But this is actually going to lead you down a path of a turbulent relationship with your child, that your child is their own being. They need to make their own decisions in their own life, where you might have certain goals or certain aspirations of things you would like to see happen for them. But as soon as you start putting that onto them, then it's going to affect your relationship with them, because now they're going to feel like they're being forced and controlled. So as you guys heard me share earlier, my son shared with me at the age of 8 that he would like to share these teachings as a teacher. And I said, okay, up to you, whatever you would like to do. But before that, when he was maybe like 5 or 6, I would ask him sometimes, I would say, what are you interested in doing in life? And he would say, oh, I want to be a police officer. I want to go back to America and be a police officer. And I said, okay, if that's what you'd like to do, you're more than welcome to do that. But have you considered that you're going to need to carry a gun? And in some cases, you might need to shoot people. And he said, really? That's what I'm going to have to do? And I said, maybe. And he said, okay, well, I need to think about this some more. Right? So I didn't tell him that he shouldn't be a police officer or that he should be a police officer. I just gave him some insight, because he didn't realize he's going to have to carry a gun potentially and actually kill somebody at some point. Right? So then he started rethinking this, and then he had some other ideas, and we just talked about those ideas. And then ultimately one day he came out and he said, I would like to be a teacher of the Buddhist teachings. And I said, okay, if that's what you like to do, I'll help you do it, but the choice is yours. And I think maybe you should think about that for a little bit, because that's the way Dad lives my life, but that doesn't mean that's the way that you need to live your life. You make the choice that's right for you. But if your choice is to share the teachings of the Buddha, I will help you do that. Right? And if you decide to do anything else in life, I will help you do that too. Right? So that's what you need to always keep in mind, that your child is their own being, and maybe you have certain things in your mind that you would like to see for your child, but you need to be more of a guide rather than forcing or controlling a child. You need to be able to be there to support them, encourage them, no matter what their choices are. Because one of the ways to eliminate a craving, desire, attachment is to fulfill it. So, for example, if my son had a craving to be a police officer and he was never a police officer, and I tried to force and control him to do something else, he would be resentful towards me, right? Because I was trying to force and control him to not be a police officer. But instead, if that's what he really would like to do, and that's what it takes for him to let that go, is to actually be a police officer, then okay, go be a police officer. So by him making his own decisions, he can explore whatever avenues he would like, and he's able to extinguish any cravings that he might have in his mind. So while it's a child or a son or a daughter that you've had, they're not your child. They truly don't belong to you. Right? You've brought them into this world, but they are their own being, and you aren't permanent in their life. And because you aren't permanent in their life, you're going to need to help them and guide them to cultivate wisdom, so that when you're not with them, or whether you're with them, they can make wise decisions. If they can only make wise decisions when you're around, then they haven't really cultivated wisdom. You would like to help them cultivate wisdom, so that whether you're around or whether you're not around, they will still make wise decisions. It's helpful to start early. As I mentioned, training can really start when they're in the womb, right? If you are pregnant or you're around people who are pregnant, the child's learning even when they're inside the womb. So any kind of arguments or hostility or anger that the mom is experiencing, this is all going to be transferred into the baby. The baby's going to experience this. And I knew this growing up, or I knew this when my wife was pregnant with our child. So even though her and I had had some differences here and there at different times in our life, when she was pregnant and all throughout my son's childhood, I ensured that any time I had any disagreements with my wife, because back then I wasn't practicing these teachings so closely, I would make sure I did that in private with my wife, just me and my wife. I would never be aggressive or hostile or bitter or forceful or anything like that, or argumentative around my son or why she was pregnant, because I knew that her emotions needed to be stable and steady, because anything that she experienced, my son was right there in her womb and it was going to experience it too. So training starts early, and you can introduce impermanence into your child's life really early. They're going to be experiencing impermanence, right? The problem that the Buddha discovered is craving. The mind's craving. It's wanting things to be permanent. And when it gets what it wants, it experiences pleasant feelings. But when the mind doesn't get what it wants, it gets painful feelings. This is why a baby cries when it first comes out of the mom's stomach, because when it's inside the stomach, it's feeling so great, it's in there, life's perfect, doesn't have to budge, it doesn't have to do anything, food is being piped in on the umbilical cord. Life couldn't be more perfect when you're in the womb of a woman, right? And then all of a sudden this impermanence comes along and boom, you get pushed out into the world. And that cozy environment that you had inside your mom's womb, that's all changed now. You experience the first big impermanence, and that's why the baby's discontent when it first comes out, right? So your child is going to experience impermanence, but you can introduce some impermanence into their life as they're growing up. So for example, my son, when he was first learning these teachings, he was learning about craving and how his mind craves permanence, and he was learning about how things around him are impermanent. And he would do these Lego toys, and he would put together Legos, and then he would put them in the living room, and he would go off to school. And he was only maybe, at that time he was 6 years old. And then when he was at school, I would break up his Legos into like 3 or 4 pieces, and I would lay them in the middle of the living room floor, so that then when he would come home, he would see the Legos broken up on the floor. And when he would come home and he would see that, he would start crying, and he would be so upset because of his craving. He's wanting these Legos to be permanent. And he had already learned the Four Noble Truths, and he already learned the 3 Universal Truths, the things that I teach. He had already learned that, but he hadn't been practicing it. So I would get down on the floor with him, and I would teach him. And I would say, hey, why are you crying? Why are you upset? Oh, my Legos. He would be crying, all upset. I was like, well, remember what we talked about the other day? Craving, desire, attachment, craving, permanence. And we would talk through it, and slowly we calm his mind down. And then I would show him how, yes, the Legos being together are impermanent. They're apart now, right? They're separated. But being separated is impermanent too. You can put them back together, right? So then he would put them back together and he would feel better, right? So then I would wait 3, 4, 5 days. He would go off to school, and I would do it again. I would break up his Lego toys again. And then he would come home and he would see him, my Lego toy. He was crying, but not as much as he was before. It was just a little bit. And then I would talk to him, and I would discuss the Four Noble Truths and craving, desire, attachment, and he would put his Lego toys back together. And then 3, 4, 5, 6 days later, he would go off to school, and I would break them up again. And then he would come home, and he would look at the Lego toys, and he would look at me, and he looked at the Lego toys and looked at me. He said, Dad, you broke up my Legos, didn't you? I said, yep, sure did. He said, okay, I'm just going to put them back together. I was like, hey, great idea. No crying, nothing upset, because he understood, right, that these are just impermanent. Whereas if I never introduced that impermanence into his life, his mind's continuing to crave permanence, he would experience discontentedness, because he's going to experience impermanence in his life. So if I can introduce impermanence in situations like this with him, then slowly but surely he can get acclimated to that, and he can train his mind to not be craving permanence. So as a parent, if you're attached to your child, when you see them cry, you will experience painful feelings. But for me, I wasn't attached to my son, and I knew that he was going to have to walk through this fire in order to appreciate the fresh air on the other side. He was going to need to experience some painful feelings in order to get to the point where he could experience peace and joy. So I needed to introduce these situations. I wasn't causing his sadness. I wasn't causing his anger. I wasn't causing him to grieve. What was causing him to grieve was the craving, desire, attachment. All I was doing was creating some impermanence. And because his mind was craving, he then experienced the discontentedness. But by him continuing to experience the impermanence, he had the opportunity to eliminate his craving. And then once he eliminated his craving, then when he came home and he saw the Lego toys were broken up, he didn't cry anymore. He wasn't upset. So I've needed to do this with a bunch of different things in his life, where I needed to introduce some impermanence to help him see that the things around him are not permanent, and help him get his mind to the point where he's not craving. And that's one of the reasons why he's so peaceful today, is that he doesn't have all these cravings in his mind wanting things to be permanent. So now Dad has seen the various cravings, and I've created situations like this where he's been able to let go of his craving. So by introducing impermanence into their daily life, which they're going to experience impermanence enough, But by you doing it specifically based on the cravings that you see them have, this will help them to let those cravings go. And they're going to get discontent. But if you're not attached to them, you'll be able to help them to walk through that. So that's why you acquiring wisdom and you getting more and more enlightened is so important. If you create a culture of cultivating and acquiring wisdom in your family, this will be really helpful for you, because in order for your children to experience in a better way of life, they're going to need to cultivate wisdom too. So if you create a culture in your family of constantly developing wisdom, then they'll kind of start learning how to do that. So for example, when me and my son are driving in the car, when I used to take him to school in the car, he would be in the seat next to me, and sometimes he would ask me questions. And he would ask me questions that I didn't know the answer to. And I would say, you know what? I don't know the answer to that, but I know who does. He said, who? I said, Google. I said, why don't you use my phone and Google that question and see what the answer is? Because I'd like to know the answer too. I'm interested in knowing that. So he would Google it and he would say, oh, here's the answer, Dad. I was like, oh, perfect. That's excellent. Now we have more wisdom. Thank you, son. You have more wisdom. I have more wisdom. Thank you so much. So he's got this culture now that he's been around. Whenever he doesn't know an answer to something, he knows he can find the answer. And sometimes it means going to talk to his mom or talking to me or talking to someone else. But he understands that cultivating wisdom in his life is what's going to lead to improvement in his life. So wherever he gets to a point where he doesn't understand something, rather than just push it aside and ignore it, he actively looks for the answer, right? He actively looks for the answer of what could potentially be the answer to a particular thing. So I've sometimes walked in his room and he's been on the computer looking at YouTube or looking at Google or something. And I'd be like, what are you doing? He's like, oh, I'm trying to find the answer for this. And I'm like, oh, perfect. Excellent, right? So he's learned on his own to be an independent thinker and actively look for wisdom in the world and try to find wisdom in different places. That whenever he doesn't understand a certain thing about the world, that's an opportunity to learn and grow. And you can cultivate that within your family and with your children to encourage them to find wisdom about things. And then I also teach him not to just believe everything that Google says too, because sometimes he gets an answer back from Google and I was like, oh, that's not accurate. I'm pretty sure that's not accurate. Why don't you check some other sources? And then he checks some other sources and he finds that it's not true. So not only do you need to teach him to cultivate wisdom, but cultivate wisdom from multiple sources and then verify and independently verify those sources. Don't just believe what it is that you see just because it's on Google, right? Some other things to think about as you're guiding your children is that you're a role model, right? That anything that you're choosing to do, the people around you are going to choose to do those things. And not just children, but coworkers, employees, nieces, nephews, life partners, whatever you do, people are going to tend to mimic that behavior. They're going to tend to do those same things. And they're wholesome things and unwholesome things too. So if you're doing any kind of unwholesome things, the people around you are going to tend to do that. So for example, if your children are young and you're feeding them food and you become impatient and you're just hurrying them up to eat, well, when you get older and you're old and you don't eat very fast and they're taking care of you, your gamma is that they're going to be the same way with you. They're going to be very impatient with you as you get older. So however you treat your children and however you function, this is what's going to come back to you. This is your gamma. So if you're yelling or hollering or you're putting pressure on your children or you're impatient with them, they're going to be that same exact way with you because that's what you taught them. But on the contrary, if you're patient, if you're calm, if you're polite, if you're respectful with your children, this is what will come back to you. So when I talk to my son, you will frequently hear me say, yes, sir, no, sir. Excuse me, sir, can you help me with that? I will speak to him in the same way that I speak to an adult, using sir and thank you and please and those kinds of things. And now he does that with me too. He will speak with me in that same way, not because I told him to do it, but because that's what he's learned from being around his dad. So he will function in the way that he's learning from me and the way he's learning from his mom and his neighbors and other people. So if you're going to be around your child and you're teaching them to be polite, kind, friendly, and respectful, be sure that you're polite, kind, friendly, and respectful. And not only to your son, but to other people, or not only to your daughter, but to other people. So like when we go to a restaurant or we go to get a taxi or something like this, he sees me treating the food servers and the taxi drivers very respectful and very politely. So now he learns how to do that himself. stuff. So your children are learning from you every moment, whether you realize it or not. They're not going to just learn from you when you sit down and try to teach them something specifically. They're going to watch your actions. They're going to watch your speech. They're going to watch the way you interact in the world, and they're going to be picking that up and gleaning information and learning from you as you conduct yourself in the world. So keeping that in mind, then you can ensure that you're making wise decisions about the way you interact in the world. So it's important to have respect towards your life partner, your parents, grandparents, siblings, because if you're treating your parents with disrespect, if you gossip and slander and badmouth your parents to your children, well, your children are learning to do that. And when they grow up, they're going to do the same thing with you, right? When they're talking to their friends, they're going to badmouth you. They're going to gossip and slander about you. So if you are respectful and polite and kind and friendly to your parents, then your children will learn that from you, because they're learning like this is how to treat parents, and they're learning how to treat parents through you. So the way that you treat your parents is the way that your children are going to treat you. So it's helpful that with your parents, your life partner, your siblings, your grandparents, all the people around you, if you're treating them with politeness, kindness, friendliness, and respect, your children are going to pick that up from you. Get comfortable with the struggle, allowing your children to struggle. Oftentimes when parents are attached to their child, they don't feel comfortable when they see their children struggling. If you see your child struggling with certain things, or you see your mom or dad struggling with certain things, you might have painful feelings because you have a craving for everything to be a certain way in their life. But if you understand that struggling is part of the journey, and that in that struggle, they're going to cultivate wisdom, then sometimes you need to step back and allow that struggle to occur, right? So one time, my son and I, he got to the point where he was sitting in the back of the truck. My wife has a truck, and when I would drive, he would sit in the back with adults. And he enjoyed sitting in the back and getting the fresh air and having the conversations with the adults. So after we did this a few times, there was a time where him and I went out in the truck alone. And he said, "Dad, I would like to sit in the back of the truck." And he's only like 8 years old at this point. And I said, no, you're too young. You can't sit back there by yourself. You need to have an adult back there with you. And he's like, I really want to sit in the back. I really want to sit in the back. So a couple of times this happened, and I was like, no, you can't sit in the back. But then eventually, after several weeks, he kept asking me to do this. So finally, we were in a certain area of the city, and I knew that the streets were kind of slow, and I also knew it was about to rain because I saw the clouds coming, and I know that he didn't know that, right? Because at 8 years old, he didn't realize that it was about to rain. And I said, okay, you would like to sit in the back? I'll let you sit in the back. Go ahead, you can sit in the back, but I just like to let you know that if something happens when you're back there, I'm not going to be able to pull over and let you come back into the car. So if it starts raining or something like that, you're going to need to stay back there. And he's like, okay, I would like to sit in the back. So I was like, all right, go ahead, sit in the back. So he sits in the back. We're driving down the road, 10, 15 minutes down the road. Of course, it starts raining, right? And we're at a stoplight and it starts raining. It's just drizzling. It's not really pouring down raining. It's just a drizzle. And he's like tapping on the window. He's like, Dad, I need to come up front. So what I did is I pulled the truck to a point where the little crease between the motorbikes that the motorbikes couldn't fit. So I pulled close enough to the car next to me that I know that he could get out safely and he wouldn't get hit by a motorbike. And then when he got into the truck, I was like, how was it back there? He was like, oh, it was nice, but I don't think I want to do that again. I was like, all right, well, up to you. It's your choice. So he had this craving to sit in the back, and the only way for him to extinguish it was to actually do it. So in some cases, you need to let your children do it. So in that situation, he was struggling, and he needed to experience that struggle so he could cultivate the wisdom that, yeah, it's unwise to sit in the back of the truck, particularly when it's about to rain. Right? Like if you would like to sit in the back of the truck, it's better to do it when it's not raining and you have some adults back there so that you can have somebody to help you get out of the truck and come up to the front. So there's going to be certain struggles that your children experience along the way, and you can let them experience these struggles. And depending on what it is that they're struggling with, it can actually be really helpful, right? So there's other struggles that my son has experienced too, and I just let him experience those struggles. Sometimes he would get in little arguments with his mom, and I had already taught him many weeks about how to have right speech, but he would get in arguments with his mom, and I would just walk away, right? Rather than sit there and try to fix it for them, I would just walk away and let them argue. And then when they got mad and they got angry and they got upset with each other, they could see that it's unwise to argue with each other, right? So sometimes you're going to need to let your children struggle. Sometimes when parents are attached to their children, they don't like the struggle. They want to step in and fix everything for their child. But if you don't let your child experience that struggle, they won't cultivate the wisdom that they need. And they're going to be out in the world someday, and they're not going to be with you. So if you always try to fix every single problem that they have, then they don't cultivate that wisdom and they don't know how to make wise decisions for themselves. So sometimes the best thing you can do as a parent is step back and let them struggle a bit. And then they'll cultivate the wisdom, and then they'll come to you and ask for help, and then you'll be able to help them. It's helpful to allow your child to eliminate their attachment to you. There's things that you can be doing, because as long as your children are attached to you, they're going to be discontent. They're going to experience anger and sadness and frustration based on your relationship. So if you guys are together a lot, if they're attached to you, they're going to experience discontentedness, and it's going to cause strain in your relationship. So you can do things like letting your child go sleep at other people's houses, go with other adults, people that you trust, like parents or grandparents or aunts or uncles and things like that. Like, I don't know if you guys realize that my son was here earlier this morning, and there's a particular student that's been studying with me for a while. She has a son that's the same age as my son, and they're actually in the same class in the same school together. And she asked me, like, hey, can I take your son out? I see he's just sitting in the back of the temple. Would he like to go out with us this afternoon? And today I was like, sure, you can go ask him. So now he's out with her, right? Like, I don't know where they're at. I think she sent me some pictures. I think they're at the mall playing some games or something like that, but he's having a blast, right? He's not thinking about dad. He's not worried about dad. He's not missing dad. But hey, go have fun, right? You don't have to be attached to dad. You don't have to sit here. Go with other people. Go spend time with other people. So when you have children, you might want to hold on to them and think that, they can only be with you and you're the only person that can take care of them. But the more you get comfortable with other people taking your children and going places, this will help them to eliminate their attachment to you, and it'll help you eliminate your attachment to them. So this can be really helpful. And there's other things you can do to help them eliminate their attachment too. You're going to need patience, understanding that as you teach your children, they're going to have the same approach to learning these teachings as you. It's gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress. I can't even tell you how many times me and my son have talked about lying, right? Like, so many times we've talked about lying. He's 11 years old now. I don't think he's lied to me in the last couple of weeks, but I'm not sure, right? I'm always kind of looking around to see if there's any lies anywhere. But my goodness, children tend to lie a lot, right? And we've talked more than 100 times, I'm sure, about lying. But he just keeps doing it, right? So you're going to need to be patient. When you teach somebody something, they're not going to learn it right away. Just like you guys coming here. When I teach you guys, you don't learn something right away, right? Even something like meditation. The first time you learned it with me, you didn't just get it right away. It took you many times to learn even something like meditation. So you're going to need patience if you choose to teach somebody. If you have craving, desire, attachment, and you're wanting them to learn something the very first time you teach it to them, this isn't the way it works. Even as I mentioned, adults, when I've taught adults, there's this one particular student who's been learning with me for probably 6 years at this point. She's asked the same question at least 14 times. I started counting how frequently she was asking the question, and I lost track at 14 times. And eventually she hasn't asked the question anymore, but she asked that same exact question in exactly the same way at least 14 times. And then finally she got it. And each time I needed to be patient with her to just answer her question each time. I didn't even tell her that she was asking the same question multiple times, because if she didn't understand the answer and she hadn't yet learned it, I was interested in her continuing to ask that question. I wasn't interested in saying to her, hey, you've asked that question multiple times. Why do you keep asking it? Because I already know why she's asking it, because she doesn't understand. She hasn't retained the information. So as long as she's asking the question, I'm going to keep answering it. So with children, it's the same way, that they're going to need gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress. You're going to need to teach them how to brush their teeth many times. You're going to need to teach them to take a shower many times. And when it comes to these teachings, you're going to need to teach them these things many, many times. Whether it's lying or stealing or other things like this, you're going to need to teach them many, 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 many times. Be creative and have fun with your children. When I was teaching my child these teachings, when I was teaching Bailan these teachings, we had so much fun. I was teaching him about impermanence, the universal truth of impermanence, and I taught it to him in the house. It took me about a minute or two. And then we went on a scavenger hunt. I don't know if you guys know what a scavenger hunt is, like when you go around and you look for things. I was like, all right, now that you know about impermanence, let's go have fun. Let's go out in the village and try to find something that's permanent. So we would go around the village and he would try to find things that are permanent. And then, of course, he couldn't find anything. So then after that, we switched. We said, okay, now try to find things that are impermanent. So now we went around the village and he was like, Dad, look, the leaves in the tree are green. The ones on the ground are brown. That's impermanence. I was like, yeah, you got it. And he was like, look at the sidewalk. There's a crack in the sidewalk. That's impermanence. I was like, yeah, you're right. That's impermanence. So we had all these different games, and we've done other games besides this, not just to learn about impermanence, but even cultivating concentration and mindfulness and things like this. There's been many different games that we've played in order to help him train his mind. So you can have fun with these games. You can have fun with these teachings and turn it into a game, and the kids really like that. Be sure that as you're teaching children, you don't force them. Sometimes parents try to force their children to do things like meditation. If you try to force your child to do meditation, they'll hate it and they'll dig their feet in. And it's just like when people try to force you to do things. Usually when someone tries to force you to do something, you usually do just the opposite, right? That's usually what you do, right? You dig your feet in, you dig your heels into the sand, and you do just the opposite. So if you try to force your children to do something, they'll despise it. So even though I teach Bailan these teachings, I will usually ask him like, hey, would you like to learn about this? Or hey, would you like to learn about that? And most of the time he says yes. But there's been a few times where he's like, Dad, it's a little bit late. I'm a little bit tired. I'd rather not learn this today. Can you teach me tomorrow? And I'm like, yeah, sure. I'll teach you tomorrow. Right? So if you don't force them, then they'll be more welcoming to to the teachings and help them to learn better. Start small and then build from there. When I first started teaching Bailan, it was before I had ever really taught him anything. He was about 6 years old, and I realized that, hey, I need to teach this child the path to enlightenment. But how am I going to do that? Because I've never really taught him anything at this point in his life. It's just been playtime with my son. So I was sitting on a sofa and he was sitting down on the floor, and I realized that I was going to need to teach him these teachings, but I never taught him anything, and I wasn't sure if he would follow what it is that I had to teach him. So the first thing I did is I said, Bailan, can you hand me the remote to the TV? And he said, and I know this sounds really small, it sounds really simple, but at that point, I hadn't even asked my son that before. I never even asked him anything like that before. And he said, sure, Dad, here you go. Here's the remote. And I was like, oh, okay. He's listening to me. He's responding to me. He's doing what I asked. So then I waited a few minutes, and I saw that he got up and went into the kitchen, and he was getting a glass of water. And I said, can you get Dad a glass of water? And he said, sure, Dad, I can get you a glass of water. So he got me a glass of water, and he brought me a glass of water. And I was like, okay. So I started small like that. And then slowly but surely we built on top of that, where I would ask him little things here and there just to see if he was interested to follow what it is that I had to share with him. And he was, so we continued to learn and he continued to grow. So sometimes you need to start really small, because you might not even be able to have a relationship with your child where you just ask them something and they do it. Right? Because oftentimes parents are trying to force their children, or they might yell at their children, or they might holler at their children. If that's the kind of relationship you have with your child, you would like to change that. You would like to change it where you're asking questions, or you're asking them to do something, and then they politely respond, and they do something because they realize it's a wise decision to do it. Whereas if you're hostile with your children, they're not going to be interested in learning with you. Get comfortable with mistakes. That you're going to make mistakes as you're teaching your children. As you come up with these different games and different things like this, there's going to be certain things that you're going to make mistakes on, and you're going to need to be comfortable with those mistakes. That as you implement a certain thing and you trip and you fall and you mess up and you realize that this particular thing didn't work, you're going to need to let that go and shift There are times where I was teaching my son and I thought that this game would be really great. It would be really fun. It's exactly what I needed to do. And we would be doing it for 5-10 minutes. And I would realize, no, this isn't working. This isn't the way to do it. And I had to let that thing go and then change to something else and start teaching him something else and come up with a different game. So trial and error is going to be part of sharing teachings with other people. There's something called proactive training versus real-time training. The way that I think about proactive training, these are things like developing the 3 universal truths, the 4 noble truths, the Eightfold Path, the 5 precepts, meditation training. This is like proactive training to actively help them learn. But then there's like real life training, like in daily struggles, like the Legos that I was talking about. That's like real life training, like in the moment, right? Or like my son sometimes would come home from school and I would say, how's your day at school today? He's like, oh, Dad, it's really good. But I have a question for you. I stepped on a cockroach today walking on the sidewalk and it died. Am I going to get unwholesome karma from that? And he would ask me these kinds of questions. And that's like a real life struggle that he was struggling with. He thought he was going to get bad karma or unwholesome karma as a result of having killed this cockroach. So I had to explain to him that there needs to be intention behind it. And I asked him, I said, did you intend to kill it? He said, no, I was just walking down the sidewalk and it came under my foot and I stepped on it. And I was like, okay, so you didn't intend to kill it? He said, yeah, I didn't intend to kill it. And I said, okay, well, there needs to be intention behind your action in order for you to produce some kind of unwholesome karma, and there wasn't any intention there. So day to day, they're going to experience certain struggles, and you're going to need to have loving kindness, compassion, and patience to be able to help them with those struggles. So there's proactively sharing the teachings with them, but then there's the day to day, them struggling and having difficulties where you're going to need to help them along to learn the teachings and integrate them into their life. Let me see something here. Yeah, this is a really long discussion because there's a lot of things that you can be teaching a child. Rather than go through this entire discussion, I think what I'm going to do, because we're basically at 3 o'clock now, is just pause here and see if you guys have any questions. I've done this discussion other times and it's been recorded. If you would like to see all the different things, there's a lot that you can do with children to teach them these. But rather than spend the next probably 45 minutes or an hour, which is what it would probably take me to explain all of this, what I'll do is just stop here, see if you guys have questions. Do you guys have any questions? Anybody online have questions? Okay, so what I'll do then is I'm just going to end here since we end class typically at 3 o'clock. If anybody would like to see what the other things that I wrote here as part of sharing teachings with children, I can flip through this at the end of class and show that to you. But also these are on the website under our free books, our free resources section. I put all of our slides in a PDF there. You can also access them there if you like. But if you'd like to see any of the things that I didn't cover, come let me know and I'll flip through the slides for you so you can see and you can read and you can ask me any questions that you like. So tomorrow during the morning, we're going to do loving kindness meditation. And then the very first topic is practicing non-attachment, how to eliminate attachment to those closest to us. So that's what I was talking about, Kushi, that's tomorrow morning, first thing. And then after that, because that's going to take the whole morning, then in the afternoon, it's developing and maintaining relationships, choosing wholesome friends and a life partner. Here I'm going to teach you how to choose friends and a life partner if that's what you would like to have in your life, but doing so without judgment, that you don't look down on people, because you're going to need to include wholesome people into your life, and you're going to need wisdom about how to include certain people into your life, but you would like to do this without judging other people. So I'm going to teach you how to do that in the afternoon tomorrow. Okay, so thank you all for coming. Thank you for learning, and perhaps we'll see you guys in a future class. Okay, Sawadee Kap. Sawadee Kap.